Greetings and welcome. My name is Mike Bankhead. I happen to be your host. I'm a bass player and songwriter from the Jam City, Dayton, Ohio. On this episode of the podcast, I welcome Rhea Goddard. She is a musician who is originally from California, but calls Nashville home these days, and released a very interesting album earlier this year that tells a specific story. You'll hear that story today on the You Could Be My Aramis podcast. Let's get to the conversation. Now, we were already talking and you started telling a story about where you did most of the writing for your album that came out in July, and I wanted to stop you so we could get that story recorded. So, first of all, this is Michelle, everybody. And Michelle, please continue telling that story.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me and thanks for listening. The writing process for me for that album is really interesting. So I wrote most of Breaking Bread, Songs of Reconciliation. It was between 2019 and 2020. And I was running a lot during that time. And I would have maybe an idea for a song, and I would develop that idea and lyrics for it literally while I was running. Running for me over the years has just been a good release and a way to clear my head and just kind of get out of my own thoughts. And when I'm in that space, if I have a creative vision, I can kind of meditate on that. So there are many songs, and thank goodness for technology, I could just have my telephone with me. And if I thought of a lyric, I didn't know, funny story, I did not know about voice memos at that time. Even though I worked in tech, I never really used voice memos. So I would just record myself, like make a little video, and I would, as I was coming up with lyrics, I would just sing them into a video recorder. So I have all of these videos of me kind of in my running gear, randomly coming up with lyrics. And then I would take those videos, I would listen to them again back at my apartment, and I would kind of piece together the songs. That was one part of the writing process. The other part of the writing process would literally happen in my apartment. I was very thankful to have an apartment in downtown Nashville I leased it in September 2019 when I moved to Nashville, and it had a wonderful view. So I would just kind of sit on my balcony and think about these lyrics, and often finish songs up there as I'm thinking about them. So the wonderful thing about being in nature is you get to observe so much. So often, like when I was writing one song in particular, Border Wall, I'm running and I see a dandelion, and then that becomes part of the song. While I was up on the balcony, I saw these beautiful pink clouds kind of floating in the sky, and then that became a part of the song. So I've started writing a few songs or seeds of songs for a next album, but I probably will take that approach to just kind of be in nature, because when you're just in nature, there's just so much to absorb and observe. And those can often, it also, even the beats, like as I'm running, like those beats become incorporated into my the music and the arrangement. As I'm pounding the pavement, that becomes part of the song too. If I'm running fast, that can become a part of the song. If I'm running slower, that can become a part of the song. So all of that kinesthetic movement definitely helps, at least me, in the songwriting process.
So there's a couple of things I wanted to ask you about the album. And first of all, you do a really nice job on your website explaining it and breaking it down. So I don't want you to repeat a lot of that, because listeners, I'm going to put the link to the website in the show notes. I want people to go read all that stuff. But two things that I wanted to talk about really briefly, and again, you did touch on these, is first of all, you acknowledge that the kids these days don't really consume albums as an art form. And as an old person, I still believe in the album as an art form and making a cohesive statement and taking your listener on a journey.
Yeah.
And you've totally done that. Your album clocks in at 17 songs, which is not going to fit on vinyl. It would probably fit on a CD because I don't think it comes in longer than 80 minutes, but it's right up against it if it's not longer than 80 minutes, it's like right up against it. So the first thing is, what possessed you to make a statement that was that long, knowing that there's a generation of music listeners that don't get it, right? I mean, people my age, we get it, but young people might not. And second, this album is basically like a play, but audio, right? You've got an intro, a couple of 3 distinct acts where there's a story arc and an intermission. So first is, what drove you to make an album that was that lengthy, and second is, where did the idea to make this kind of an audio play come from?
Yeah, both excellent questions, especially as you had stated, for this generation. I truly hope that my music can speak to all generations, and perhaps because I am of a generation that I owned a record player. My mom had a ton of different records that I would listen to, and I would usually listen to them start to finish. And I think that is an art form that I just became accustomed to, listening to those beautifully crafted stories in whole, as if you're reading a book from start to finish. When I was writing songs for the album, I would love to say it was always in my mind's eye that, I'm going to create this kind of album play and create this number of songs and have it in this succession or order. But it was really, as I was developing songs, I was noticing that they were fitting in certain categories. And so when I came to working with the gentleman who is my sound engineer, Brian Connolly, he, as we're working through kind of how to, as we were working through the songs that I had written and the different arrangements, I felt like I had a certain amount of stories to tell, and some of them weren't going to make sense if I didn't have, like, for instance, a little intro part to them. So I developed like little intro parts, again, not necessarily thinking that this would be arranged or pieced together the way that I was going to put it together. But then when I thought of these very, like, Letting Go, for instance, which introduces the album, it was just such a simple, almost like meditation, like letting go, letting go, letting go. Like, and once that kind of came to fruition, I thought, oh, that would be a really nice opener. Well, if I have an opener, why don't I have a kind of an intermission? And I feel like I'm kind of answering both questions at once. So I'll try to answer your first question. So, this 17 songs. Yes, it is a lot of music like you might find on a more traditional album. I've felt like I had a lot of stories in me and a lot of healing to do. And as I was going through that process, I just was coming up with quite a few songs. And I thought, if I'm going to make an album that feels complete to me, I'm going to put all these songs on the album, and we'll just kind of see how it goes. I mean, one might say that I'm that green to the music industry that I thought that this would work, but it works, right? We've seen other albums that might be more like dual, if you want to call them CDs, like double sets that have an extensive amount of music from one's entire repertoire. I just happened to put it on my first album. I'm grateful that, again, I had a sound engineer that was working with me through this process and didn't scoff at the amount of music that I was producing, the number of songs, et cetera. And I had a lot of people who, it is advantageous to make that many songs and put that many songs on one album, but they believed in my vision just as much as I believed in it. So that's the first part of it. To summarize, I just had that many songs in me. And I felt like the healing process produced 17 songs, in that healing process kind of gets to this album play. When I was living in the Bay Area in California, I had a subscription to the Broadway's San Francisco's version of like Broadway comes to San Francisco. So I was seeing 6-7 plays every year. I was very blessed to be able to see this amount of wonderful theater that came to San Francisco. I think when I was exposed to that, I don't know if my brain naturally got attuned to like, oh, I see things in acts. Like here's a first act, here's an intermission, here's a second act. I also am going to the symphony a lot here. And I had started going to the symphony again when I moved to Nashville, and they usually have an intermission. It's not usually related to the same, piece of work. They'll have one composer's body of work, an intermission, the next composer. But I don't know if it's just kind of getting into that rhythm that I thought, okay, well, as I'm looking at this collection of music, how can I organize it in a way that makes sense to the listener? And I have some of these short songs too. I think it would make sense to have, like, as I said, Letting Go as an opener, and have these songs that really fit the internal healing process kind of go into Act 1, and then have a little intermission that relates to the songs in what I will call Act 2, which is more about healing those relationships that we have with our closest folks around us. And then going into Act 3, which is addressing parts of society. And for me, that it just made sense. I tend to, and maybe again, it's working in tech, trying to organize things that make sense in a way that would be easy for somebody to follow. And that type of, storytelling in the album made sense to me. Why don't I just make it kind of like a play of almost a healing journey play? Hopefully that answers both of your questions.
Yeah, it's a unique approach to making music, and I think that in order to properly digest it, you kind of have to consume it in the order that you put it in. So hopefully folks will listen to you, to our conversation. They'll go check out the video over on your website where you talk about the process and how you and what drove you, and then listen to it in order, the way the artist intended. That's how I think people are going to get what you intended them to get out of it.
Yeah, and it'd be a wonderful question back to you. Have you noticed other artists that are structuring their albums? And I know a lot of times nowadays it's an EP rather than a complete album, that are intentionally set to be listened to in a specific order. I can think of one artist in particular that I know had wanted, I think it was maybe Spotify, not to shuffle the songs around because they wanted their album to be listened to a specific order. But can you think of any artists?
Yeah, I mean, the first one that comes to mind is Failure. It's interesting you specified that because their latest album, they intentionally wrote it so that you could listen to any song and have it be out of sequence and have it make sense, which is the first time in their career they've done that. Generally, their albums have always been, you have to listen to it in a specific order. They had musical segues tying parts together, and they were definitely trying to take you on a journey. And these are old guys like me. They're a little older than me, actually. And that's the musical environment they came from. And I think it shows a little bit of wisdom on their part and maybe some humility to, I guess, adapt their art style to match what young listeners are after. Maybe they're trying to go after more young listeners. But yeah, Failure is a band out of Los Angeles, and that's the first band that comes to mind. But basically, in my genre, in rock and roll, I think a lot of rock artists carefully sequence their albums because we all grew up on albums that were carefully sequenced. Now, part of that is because the limitations of vinyl force you to do certain things, like you can't put the loud track at the end because of the groove situation, right? And so that's why historically on rock albums, like the lead track's pretty loud because you can be loudest at the beginning of a vinyl record. And some of those, habits just kind of seeped into the way that musicians would make albums, even after the technology no longer dictated it. So yeah, there are, and in your genre, I don't know because I don't listen to a lot of music in your genre, which I would call more folk. Is that accurate?
Yeah, genre is such an interesting thing nowadays. Yeah, part of, like you were mentioning, and I'm learning all these new things. So thank you for educating me. As again, I'm rather new to the industry, so I didn't realize the limitations of vinyl. But another part of releasing music, as you know, is you have to choose a genre for which it will get classified so folks can find your music.
That's pretty annoying sometimes. And to clarify that for the listeners who haven't had the experience of doing this, we musicians cannot put our own music out on Spotify and Tidal and iTunes and Amazon or whatever. You have to go through a distributor. And one of the things the distributor always asks you is, what's the genre of your music? And if you are multi-genre or between genres, well, then that's just, you have like an existential crisis when you have to answer that question, right?
Yeah, and I did, because some of my musical influences are all over the board, and my music reflects that. So growing up in California, I was listening to ska music. I was listening to music that my grandparents had listened to, which were more standards. My mom's album repertoire was Beatles, and my dad had me listening to Pink Floyd and Toto. And then my sister, who's 8 years older than I am, I had listened to everything from New Kids on the Block to Madonna. And then into my generation, I listened to a lot of hip hop and R&B, and then pop. And so I have all of these different influences, and I feel like my music kind of, I'll take like Gift from the Sea. It sounds more like an old, what I was thinking about when I was writing that song was From Here to Eternity. The movie, I believe it was set in the I'll say 1940s or 50s. I'm not sure the exact year. But more of like a smoky, jazzy, standard song. Well, that doesn't necessarily have anything to do, it feels like, with where I've classified myself as Americana music. And yes, it does create an existential crisis because I have that song on one end of the spectrum. And then I have a memory on the other side of the spectrum, which is heavily influenced by Guns N' Roses, because I listened to November Rain ad nauseum when it came out. And I loved Slash's guitar solo so much. We actually found the amp sound that, the amp that he had used, and found that similar sound. So when my guitarist was doing the guitar solo, it would emulate that. And so, well, where do you classify that? That would be more rock rather than like a standard. So where I eventually landed is I was really grateful that last year I went to Americana Fest. And what I noticed from Americana artists are they have this deep love of storytelling. And if there was one thread that I could find across all of my music, it is the deep love of storytelling. I think it's something that I get from my grandfather, who used to love to tell all these stories. But I tend to tell, whether we're talking about the album as a whole, telling it like a story play, or each song, I tend to have, a beginning, middle, and end. And that's a lot of Americana music. I feel like there is a tradition of storytelling within that music. And then also I align a lot with the values that the Americana Music Association highlights within Americana music. And it just it felt right. It felt like I identified with that particular genre and the folks who are telling stories within that genre. And so here is where I've landed if I had to classify myself as just one genre. But again, I feel like my music, if someone is looking for a standard song, they can find it on my album. If someone's looking for a rock song, they can find it on my album. If they're looking more for like tonally, music that they're used to listening to from those two categories. But yeah, it's such an interesting endeavor. Have you had a similar experience?
Recently, and so I, strangely enough, have an EP in process where every song on it's a completely different genre.
Mm-hmm.
So I do feel your pain, and this was intentional. I intentionally wanted to make a record where every song is a completely different genre. So yeah, that makes answering that question on the distributor site not fun, right? I mean,
yeah. How will you approach it?
I forget what I selected. But I basically selected one and moved on, and that one's not ready to come out yet. But like I've got that one has a funk song on it, a jazz song on it, a blues song on it, an Americana song on it, and a gospel song on it. Right? I mean, so I could say it's a funk album, but there's really only one funk song on it, and I could say it's a blues album. There's really only one blues song on it. So yeah, I feel your pain.
Yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts about getting rid of the categorization of music in general?
It would be nice, but I don't see how that's possible because as human beings, we just like to put things in categories. It helps our brain stay organized. Also, how in the world would music awards work if there weren't any categories?
Oh, this is true. I don't know.
Or how would you organize a record? It's a good thought experiment. There's no categories. How do you organize the record store?
Yeah, yeah. Well, maybe alphabetically.
Right, which they're already alphabetically within each category, right?
Yeah, but I think maybe one way around it is like having a selection. Does your album fit multiple categories? And they do to some extent, like you have a primary, a secondary, etc., but they only go so far. So I think it would be nice to have like another option that would say, does your music fit more than one category, and just be able to select either an unlimited amount of options or more than just what is available right now. So to your point, if your album it has 5 songs on it and each of those are in different categories, somebody who is looking for something could find it.
It's going to make it interesting to market the thing when that time comes around.
Yeah. Well, we can talk and I can tell you how I've done it with mine. But yeah, I hear you. It definitely has helped. I think once I found the Americana Association, just realized like the common thread of storytelling, it made it much easier. But still at times I don't ever want my music not to be heard by folks who might enjoy listening to it too. Just because I've classified myself as an Americana artist.
I forget who it was, but I have a friend that said that the Americana is just basically a catch-all for guitar when it's not distorted or something. But I wish I could remember who told me that. But it's just kind of it's like we don't really know what to do with this, but there's guitars. Let's call it Americana.
Yeah, I can see that too, and I've heard some. I mean, if you look, I think the Americana Music Awards just came out for for release on TV, or wherever you watch your TV, if that be on YouTube, etc. And I think numerous artists had said the same thing. We really don't know how to classify Americana music, but we know we fit here. So it is very hard to define at the end of the day.
So let's talk about process. When it's time for you to write a song, what's the first tool that you reach for?
Oh my gosh, that is an amazing question. Well, I would say my cell phone, just because I'm usually recording a note, a voice memo. If something's in my head, I feel like my husband's going to laugh because he'll say that my cell phone's in my hand all the time. But it's true. I mean, having a cell phone handy and having an idea where I can just kind of sing it out and have it recorded and can go back to it is such a handy tool. I'd say after that, it would be, usually I have a plethora of journals. So I'll usually write in one of the journals, and if I'm in deep songwriting mode, I usually have one just for songs, and I'll grab that and start jotting down lyrics as well.
So it sounds like you write lyrics first.
Oh, goodness. Do I write lyrics first? I usually, looking at the group of songs for this album, it's typically the chorus that comes with the lyric. Well, it's the chorus set. It's the music I hear in the chorus, and it's the chorus itself. And that's usually what I start to build around. I'll hear something like a chorus, and then I'll start to build out all of the other lyrics around that. And then I believe I'm, trying to go back in time, then other music will kind of fit itself in. Yeah, that's usually how I'd say the majority of the songs are usually the chorus first with the music, except the song that brought me to Nashville, which was Nashville. That is still something I can't explain to this day. I just literally had a complete lyric and chorus with the music just pop into my head. It's not happened since. And I feel like it was a divine gift to have been given that. And the other songs have had much more of this process where I'll hear like a chorus line, and then I'll start like humming other parts to that, and then start building out lyrics from there.
Excellent. Just really two more questions, and the two I saved are the ones that I try to ask everybody. The first one is, go way back as far as you can remember to your youth. What's the first song you can ever remember hearing?
Oh my goodness. Oh, well, the first song as you that came to mind was just like a nursery rhyme, like Mary Had a Little Lamb. I had a little play school one of those toy album record players, and I believe one of them was Mary Had a Little Lamb. So that was probably the very first song I can remember. But because my dad had like an obsession with Toto, the album that has Africa and Rosanna on it, like Rosanna is implanted in my mind. Like I can hear that song. That and I think it came out in like 82. I was born in 81. So that just has has been implant and has made its impression on my brain.
I like the mention of a nursery rhyme because, of course, you've got one on your record. You took a classic nursery rhyme melody and messed with it. I'm not going to tell people what it is because I want them to go listen to it and find it for themselves. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you for acknowledging that. I appreciate that.
All right. And also, what did your childhood smell like? That question I stole from Terry Izzy Rock Martin, so hat tip to him. But yeah, what did your childhood smell like?
And that is an amazing question. Yeah. Chicken paprikash. My grandfather was born in Budapest, and some of my earliest memories are just going over to my grandparents' house and having these wafts of him cooking chicken paprikash. I mean, just, it's chicken paprikash. For those who aren't familiar, it's a traditional like goulash or stew. And it's usually made, and I'm blessed to have the recipe, but it's usually made with sauteing onion and then just, boiling a chicken in its own juices, and then you add sour cream to it, and that smell, I mean, is just, it is a part of my childhood. I can smell that right now talking about it.
Well, that sounds cozy and delicious.
Yeah, actually, you know what? That is a good thing to make this week.
Did you pick up any Magyar from your grandfather?
I wish. Hungarian is one of the most challenging languages to learn. I think it's like in one of the top five. And my grandmother didn't speak it. So the only time that I ever heard it, and thank you for saying that. That's really awesome. And saying Magyar. My great aunt spoke Hungarian. He spoke Hungarian. And then if a few of his Hungarian friends would come around, they would speak it. So it just was, he did try to teach me numbers, and I can barely remember those, but I am fulfilling a lifelong dream of mine in June. And I'm actually going on a cruise down the Danube and finally going to Hungary. I'm so fortunate. I've lived in 2 countries outside of the US. I've had a number of travels abroad, but I've never gone back to my grandfather's home country. And I finally get to do it in June. And just, I'm hoping to go visit the village that he was born in too.
That's awesome. We're going to have another one of these where we talk about you living in other places, because I love hearing about people's experiences when they've lived places that are not this one, and also I'm kind of big into travel, so I also like travel stories. So at some point I'll have to get you back, and it'll just be like a travel chat.
Oh, I would love that. I've been traveling. I've been on a plane since I was probably 1 or 2. My first trip was to London when I was 5, my first abroad trip. And I love, I mean, I studied international economics because I loved traveling so much. And I can't envision a life where I'm not going to be on a plane at some point, going to some place and meeting folks who just invigorate me. I've loved living abroad. So yes, please, whenever you want to talk about travel, I'm your gal.
Other than your website, MichelleRayGoddard.com, where should I send people to find you and connect with you?
Well, folks can connect with me on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and I have made the leap. I am now a TikToker. So
wow. How's that working out for you? Do you understand it?
TikToking over there. I am so green to this. I literally started about a week ago. I'm getting the ropes to it, but I'm kind of just uploading some of the videos that I've made that I've already made outside of TikTok. I will let you know how it goes when I actually make a video inside TikTok and what that experience is like. So right now it's just been familiarizing myself on uploading the videos, how to put a description, and the functionality of adding some text or whatnot. But yeah, I will let you know how it goes. One other place too, before I forget, is LinkedIn. I used to be a recruiter. I love LinkedIn. So if you are on LinkedIn, please connect with me on LinkedIn.
You know what? I'm going to go check that right now. But thank you, Michelle, for your time and taking time out of the day to talk to me and talk about your record. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with next, because, writers, we don't stop writing. So
we
thanks.
don't. Yeah. Thank you, Mike. And I can't wait to hear your album when it comes out too.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for the conversation. Thank you, dear listener. Dear listener, I have a favor to ask of you. I talked briefly about an EP that I have coming out next year. The best way for you to know when I'm releasing something new is to be on my mailing list. Would you be willing to kindly join my mailing list? You can do that by clicking the link in the show notes or in the episode description. This is the second podcast of the week. You're going to get another one on Friday. Looking forward to talking to you again then.